Okay. I believe you wanted to focus specifically on the Aaronic Priesthood, Ed, so I'll just do that. But I will make a few preliminary comments, because this is like a Latter-day Saint and Protestant dialogue discussion. There's not one perspective being discussed here, there's actually two. So if one will hold to the historic Protestant understanding of the priesthood, namely the priesthood of all believers, and that, and the idea that was produced by Luther in the Babylonian captivity of the church in 1520, one will have to show a historical pedigree from the close of the New Testament in about 97 with the end of the book of Revelation to 1520. If not, and as I said last week, Protestant claims that the Great Apostasy is false. Well, it's unconvincing to a Latter-day Saint who knows history. But with respect to the Aaronic priesthood, because I'm sure like Hebrews 7:12 and the John 19:30 and the Hebrews 7 and Aparapatos will be discussed, and that'll be fun. With respect to the Aaronic priesthood specifically, if one takes seriously the Old Testament prophecies about the nature of the new covenant, and there's many, it's not simply a perfect sacrifice as opposed to the iterative sacrifices that are prophesied. Also, a ministerial priesthood is also prophesied in the Old Testament. For instance, in Isaiah 66, we read the following, and I'll quote from the King James, but if someone has a favorite translation, I'll switch. And I know their works and their thoughts. It shall come that I will gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and see my glory, and will set a sign among them, and I will send those that escape of them unto the nations, to Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, that draw to the bow, to Tophael, to Javan, to the isles afar off, that have not heard my fame, neither have seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the Gentiles, and they shall bring all your brethren for an offering unto the Lord out of all the nations upon horses, and in chariots, and in litters, and upon mules, and upon swift beasts, to my holy mountain Jerusalem, saith the Lord, as the children of Israel bring an offering in a clean vessel into the house of the Lord. I will also take of them for priests and for Levites, saith the Lord. And as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. That's Isaiah 66:18-22. And just to quote what I've written on this, in this pericope, Isaiah, speaking of the last days, has God's people engaged in priestly temple ministry, consistent with Latter-day Saint claims, not just about an ordained priesthood, but also temple worship in the new covenant. Furthermore, God promises to take of them Levites, and the Hebrew is actually Lalavim Kohanim, which means Levitical Priests, without regard of their genealogy. Some critics claim that the Latter-day Saints have an unbiblical view of the Aaronic priesthood, as we don't ordain people to this priesthood based on their genealogy. Ron Rhodes, Marion Bodine are two examples of that. However, with the death of Christ, such requirements were annulled, and we see the biblical evidence of this practice in Isaiah's prophecy quoted above. So if, with the death of Jesus, or sometime around that, based, I would say, on the misunderstanding of Tetelestai and the rending of the veil, and I'm sure we might discuss that as well, we are meant to believe in a priesthood of all believers merely. And I'm sure we'll discuss 1 Peter 2 as well. However, if Isaiah is a true prophet, one will have to explain this prophecy. Is it a false prophecy? Was it a contingent prophecy that happened? Or was Isaiah sloppy in claiming that not only will it be ministerial priesthood in the new covenant and the end days, but amongst these people, they will be Levitical priests. And I will just make reference to one other text, if that's okay, and then I'll end. And it's from Isaiah 56:6-7, another prophecy of the new covenant. And I'll quote from the NRSV. And the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, all who keep the Sabbath, and do not profane it, and hold fast my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted in my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. Now, again, I'm just going to quote, I've written a book on this, so if someone wants to see a case for the biblical basis for Latter-day Saint theology, I'll happily send you a copy. But I'm just going to quote what I have here, and then I'll end. In the synoptic accounts of the temple cleansing in Matthew 21:13, Mark 11:7, and Luke 19:46, Christ refers to God's house being a house of prayer. That reference to house of prayer occurs in Isaiah 56, 6 to 7, quoted above, where the prophet Isaiah foresaw major changes in the temple liturgy in the future, changes so major that Levitical priests will not be the only ones offering sacrifices. In Isaiah 56, 6 to 7, God announces through the prophet that the foreigners will offer burnt offerings and sacrifices in his holy mountain, where the Jerusalem temple is located, and that God will accept them on his altar. This is looking beyond priesthood confined to the tribe of Levi. He's looking forward to something major happening in the future that will involve a massive change in the temple liturgy in the Levitical priesthood. The shock in Isaiah 56, 6 to 7 is its prediction that foreigners will come to minister in the temple, because the word used for minister or serve in 56:6, sharat in Hebrew, refers to liturgical service. The prophet sees Gentiles offering sacrifices in Jerusalem. This is omitted from Isaiah 56 in the Dead Sea Scrolls, perhaps because this idea was so repugnant. It is highly suggestive that as Christ cleanses the temple, he quotes part of the scripture passage referring to foreigners undertaking priestly sacrifices, sacrificial duties, I should say, in the temple. So just in closing, and I'm sure we'll be discussing other biblical issues and other historical issues, and that's fine. But with respect to these two prophecies, because they're clearly prophecies of the end times and the new covenant, it's not simply God's people, it's God's people being engaged in temple liturgical action, and it's on that a Levitical priesthood and some other priesthood is predicated on. So if one wants to reject the idea that in the new covenant, there's no ministerial priesthood, there's no specific priesthood apart from the priesthood of all believers, as understood historically by Protestants, one will have to explain, not just like the New Testament passages that will be discussed, like Aparapatus and Hebrews, but one will have to explain what's going on. Were these contingent prophecies that never took place because of intervening circumstances? Are these metaphorical? And if so, why would God use metaphors that would, at face value, be repugnant to the new covenant? Okay. And I would argue these are not the only evidences, but like very solid evidence for at least the idea that there's a ministerial priesthood as part of the new covenant. Now, that's not unique to Latter-day Saints. Catholics, Eastern Orthodox also have that. But it's something that's also absent, however, in much of Protestantism. And I would argue it's a novelty based on a misinterpretation of 1 Peter 2 and other texts that was introduced by Luther as an overreaction against Romanism in 1530. But that was 7 minutes. I do apologize, but
It's not a problem. Appreciate you guys taking the time to painstakingly lay this out. And